This story is titled, My Stepdaughter Told Me I'm Nobody and Not Her Real Mom. So I refused to pay for her college tuition and walked away for good. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and makes sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey everyone, I'm Lauren, and I guess I'm here to vent a little because honestly, I don't know how else to process what's happened over the past few years. I'm 38, and I live in a town that's small enough that you know your neighbors, but big enough to have everything you need. I've been an event planner for most of my adult life, and it's my passion. I worked my way up from planning birthday parties for friends and family, to organizing weddings, big corporate events, and even some fancy galas. It's taken years of hustle, but my business is finally something I'm proud of. So, my work led me to Brett. He was a contractor I hired for a major renovation at one of the venues I frequently used for weddings. He wasn't my first pick, my usual contractor was unavailable, but Brett came highly recommended, and from the first meeting I could see why. He was the kind of guy who could charm anyone. He was easygoing, professional, and had this warm, genuine smile that made you feel like you were in good hands. We spent a lot of time together during that project, going over plans, materials, timelines, you name it. At first, our conversations were strictly about work, but as the weeks went on, we started chatting more personally. He'd tell me about his daughter, Tessa, who was 13 at the time. He was a single dad, raising her on his own because her mom had lost custody due to some bad choices. He didn't go into detail, but it was clear he was protective of Tessa and wanted to give her a good life. I think that's what drew me to him, how much he cared about his daughter. He'd talk about how Tessa loved art and spent hours painting in her room. He even showed me a few pictures of her work on his phone, and I remember thinking how talented she was for her age. When the project was wrapping up, Brett surprised me by asking me out for coffee. I was hesitant at first because, honestly, I'd been so focused on my career that I hadn't made much time for dating. But there was something about Brett that felt different. He was kind, thoughtful, and just easy to talk to. So, I said yes. That coffee date turned into dinner dates, and before I knew it, we were in a relationship. And talking about marriage, Brett was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Steady, supportive, and just a genuinely good guy. And Tessa, she was a sweetheart. When I met her, she was shy but polite, and I could tell she adored her dad. About a year into dating, we got married and Brett and Tessa moved in with me. It was a big step, but it felt right at the time. I wanted to create a stable home for Tessa, and I hoped I could be the kind of stepmom she could rely on. At first, things were great. I made an effort to bond with Tessa, taking her shopping, helping her redecorate her room, and even letting her tag along to some of the smaller events I planned. She loved seeing how everything came together, and I thought it was a good way for us to connect. I even bought her an easel and paints, encouraging her to pursue her art. Brett would always thank me for everything I did for Tessa, telling me I was making a difference in her life. It felt good to hear that, like I was really becoming part of their little family. But there were moments that made me uneasy. Tessa still visited her mom occasionally, and Brett insisted it was important for her to maintain that connection. But I kept quiet because, after all, I was just the stepmom, right? But I couldn't shake the stories Brett had told me about her mom being bold and making bad choices. I worried about what kind of influence she might have on Tessa, but I kept those thoughts to myself. I actually met her mom once. It was at one of Tessa's school events. She showed up unannounced, and it was awkward. She looked disheveled and was loud, drawing attention to herself in a way that felt deliberate. She didn't speak to me directly, but the glares she gave me said plenty. Still, I tried not to let it bother me. Tessa seemed happy, and that's what mattered. At least that's what I told myself. Life went on, and for a while, everything felt manageable. I was juggling my business, building a life with Brett, and creating what I thought was a stable home for Tessa. But looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming. Little things that I brushed off or ignored, because I wanted so badly for everything to work out. For example, Tessa had this habit of comparing me to her mom in subtle ways. She'd say things like, "My mom used to make that differently," or "Mom says I shouldn't eat this because it's unhealthy." I tried not to take it personally because, well, she was a kid, and I figured it was natural for her to miss her mom. But it still stung sometimes. And then there was Brett. As much as he praised me for what I was doing for Tessa, he had a tendency to go quiet whenever there was tension. If Tessa was upset, or if something didn't go smoothly, he'd retreat instead of addressing the issue. I chalked it up to him not wanting to rock the boat, but now I wonder if it was something deeper. I kept telling myself that these were just normal growing pains, that every family has its challenges, and we'd get through it. But the truth is, I was ignoring the signs because I wanted so badly to believe in the picture-perfect life I thought we were building. Now that I'm writing this, I wish back then I'd paid more attention to those early warning signs. Maybe then I wouldn't be where I am now, questioning everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and myself. Anyway, things started shifting around the time Tessa turned 16. At first, it was little things. Her pulling away, spending more time in her room, and responding to me with short, clipped answers. I figured it was just normal teenage stuff. She was juggling school, friends, and all the drama that comes with high school. I told myself not to take it personally, but as the months went on, it became clear that it wasn't just teenage moodiness. Tessa wasn't just pulling away from me. She was actively pushing me out. She started asking Brett for things she used to come to me for. Whether it was help with a school project or just wanting a ride somewhere, she'd go to him directly, skipping me entirely. I tried to talk to Brett about it, but he brushed it off. "She's a teenager, Lauren. You know how they are," he said, like it was no big deal. I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. It wasn't just her attitude, it was the way she looked at me sometimes, like I was in her way. The turning point came around her 17th birthday. She was stressing about how she wanted to celebrate. That evening, I found her anxiously pacing around the house, worrying that no one would come if she threw a party at home. I hugged her, saying, "It's going to be okay." I suggested hosting it at one of the venues I frequently worked with. "Really? Oh my gosh. Everyone at school will be so jealous," she said, already buzzing with ideas. That venue was this trendy spot that her friends would think was super cool. It was her dream setup. She lit up at the idea, and for the first time in months, she actually seemed excited. And that's all I wanted to see. We spent weeks planning every detail. Tessa wanted it to be perfect. Her chance to impress her friends and show them she wasn't just some small-town girl. I made sure everything was top-notch, from the catering to the decorations. I even let her pick out a custom dress, which wasn't cheap, but I figured it was worth it to see her happy. The day of the party, everything was flawless. The venue looked stunning. Tessa looked beautiful, and all her friends showed up. I felt proud, like all the effort I'd put in was finally paying off. Everyone seemed to be having a fantastic time. The air was filled with the sound of clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, and the occasional cheer from a group gathered around a game we'd set up in the corner. I sat for a moment next to Tessa, chatting with her and some of her friends. I was genuinely enjoying the party. It felt like the perfect celebration, one Tessa would remember forever. And then, out of nowhere, she walked in, Tessa's mom. I froze for a second, unsure if I was seeing things. She wasn't supposed to be here. No one had mentioned anything about her coming. Not Tessa, not Brett. It was like she just materialized out of thin air. She strode in with this confidence that didn't match her disheveled appearance. Her clothes looked like they'd been pulled from the bottom of a laundry basket. Her hair was unkempt, and there was a smudge of something on her cheek. But none of that seemed to bother her. The way she carried herself, you'd think she was the star of the show. She didn't even pause to scan the room or find Tessa. Instead, she walked in like she owned the place, her head held high and her steps deliberate. It wasn't the casual, humble entrance of someone trying to reconnect or quietly join a celebration. No, this was different. It was like she was daring anyone to question why she was there. Her presence commanding attention, whether people wanted to give it or not. I exchanged a glance with Brett, who was standing across the room. His face went pale, and I could tell he hadn't expected her either. I hadn't even known she was invited. Tessa hadn't mentioned it, and Brett had said nothing. But there she was, walking in like a gust of honor. As I was trying to understand what's happening, I saw her marching fast right up to me when she reached the table. "Move! That's my seat," she snapped, pointing to the chair I was sitting in, as if it had her name engraved on it. I was taken aback. "Excuse me? There are plenty of other seats," I replied, trying to keep my cool. She scoffed and raised her voice. "I said move from next to my daughter. I'm her real mom, not you. I belong there." People were starting to notice. Guests were glancing over, and I could feel the tension building. I looked at Brett, hoping he'd step in, but he just stood there, avoiding eye contact. I turned back to her and said as calmly as I could, "You're welcome to stay, but you need to find another seat. This isn't the time or place for this." That set her off. Her face twisted with anger. She jabbed a finger in my direction, her voice rising with every word. "You think you can just replace me, don't you? Just because you throw your little fancy parties, you think you're better than me?" Her words hit like daggers. Not because they were true, but because they were so loud and so public. Heads were turning. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. I glanced at Tessa, who was sitting frozen. Her face flushed red. The mortified, "please make this stop" kind. Her mom wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice now echoing over the low hum of background music. Look at you, all high and mighty, acting like this is your family. Guess what? She's my daughter, not yours. I felt my hands grip the edge of the table tighter, forcing myself to stay calm. My eyes flicked toward the security team stationed near the door. They were watching the scene unfold, but hadn't moved yet. I hadn't called them over. Not yet. Part of me was still hoping I could de-escalate things without making an even bigger scene. But her yelling only got louder, her accusations sharper. I saw a few of Tessa's friends exchange nervous glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others were clearly trying to avoid looking at either of us, as if ignoring the chaos might make it disappear. Tessa's face said it all. She wanted to be anywhere but here. The celebration she had been so excited about was turning into a public meltdown, and her mom was at the center of it. That was when I knew this wasn't going to blow over on its own. Something had to be done, and fast. The tension in the room shot up like a live wire. She grabbed a plate from the table and hurled it to the floor like a jerk, the crash echoing as it shattered into pieces. Then she started throwing the food and anything her hands reached for. Everyone froze. Tessa's friends exchanged uneasy whispers, their discomfort written all over their faces. Without hesitation, I finally signaled to the venue's security team, who moved in swiftly, grabbing her arm. "It's time to leave, ma'am." She started cussing, but they escorted her out before things could escalate further. When they got her out, I tried to take the situation back to control. So I stood up, plastering on a big smile, and said, "I'm so sorry for that, folks. Please continue enjoying your meals. Drinks for everyone." The regulars returned to their meals, but the atmosphere was charged. Tessa barely spoke for the rest of the night, and most of the guests left early, making polite excuses. I felt horrible. About an hour later, she quietly said, "I have a headache. Can we go home?" The rest of the party wrapped up quickly. Guests exchanged polite excuses. When we got home, I tried to approach Tessa, hoping to salvage what was left of the night. I stood outside her bedroom door, feeling a knot of guilt and frustration in my chest. "I'm sorry about tonight," I said softly, my voice just loud enough to reach through the door. "I just wanted it to be special for you." For a moment, there was silence, and I thought maybe she wasn't going to respond. Then the door cracked open just enough for her to peer out at me, her eyes filled with an intensity that caught me off guard. But instead of the gratitude or understanding I was hoping for, her gaze was sharp, almost accusing. Without any explanation, she slammed the door shut, leaving me standing there, stunned and confused. I waited a moment, expecting her to open it again or say something more, but nothing came. My mind raced, trying to figure out what I'd done to deserve that reaction. I had stepped in to stop the chaos, right? Her mom was the one who had caused the scene, so why did I feel like I was suddenly the villain? Still shaken, I found Brett in the kitchen later that night. He was nursing a glass of water, looking lost in his own thoughts. I decided to confront him. "Did you invite her?" I asked, my voice firmer than I'd intended. He looked up quickly, his brow furrowed. "Number, why would I do that? Then how did she even know about the party?" I pressed, unwilling to let it go. He hesitated just long enough for doubt to creep in. Then he shrugged. "Maybe Tessa told her. I don't know." His words hit like a slow realization. If Tessa had invited her mom, knowing full well how unpredictable she could be, why hadn't she mentioned it? And why was I being treated like the one who'd ruined everything? The next few days were tense, with an uneasy quiet settling over the house. Tessa started avoiding me almost entirely, retreating into her room or sticking close to Brett. Whenever I tried to bring up what had happened, she'd brush me off with a short answer or a cold look that left me more confused than ever. Brett wasn't much better. Anytime I mentioned the party, he'd wave it off like it wasn't a big deal. "You're overthinking it," he'd say, as if I hadn't been humiliated in front of a room full of people. It was a strange and unsettling shift. Tessa and Brett would sit together, laughing about something, while I sat on the other side of the room, feeling like an outsider. They didn't shut me out outright, but their bond suddenly felt stronger than my connection to either of them. It was like an unspoken alliance had formed, and I wasn't part of it. Now, I'm writing this here because I'm spending nights lying awake, replaying the scene in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Tessa had slammed her door without explaining, leaving me to piece it together on my own. Do you think she's angry because I'd embarrassed her mom? Is she regretting inviting her? Or is it something else entirely that I just can't see? Update 1. Hey guys, it's been a while since my last post, but I wanted to give you an update because things have really escalated. Things stayed tense after Tessa's birthday disaster. She was distant, Brett was checked out. I kept telling myself that time would heal things, that Tessa just needed to get through her teenage years, and Brett would eventually step up and help bridge the gap. But the longer I waited, the more isolated I felt. By the time Tessa's senior year rolled around, Things were at an all-time low. She barely acknowledged me unless she needed something, and even then, it was like I was just some random adult in her life, not someone who had been helping raise her for years. Brett, of course, refused to see the problem. I decided to give her space, but space wasn't the issue. It was like Tessa had decided that I didn't matter anymore, or maybe I never did, and I was just now realizing it. Then came graduation season. It should have been an exciting time, but for me, it was just another reminder of how far things had fallen apart. I had spent months helping Brett with the logistics, making sure Tessa had everything she needed, organizing her senior pictures, and even planning a small dinner to celebrate after the ceremony. I tried to push through the awkwardness because, despite everything, I still cared. The day of graduation was beautiful. The weather was perfect, and Tessa looked stunning in her cap and gown. I sat next to Brett in the stands, cheering as loud as I could when her name was called. For a brief moment, I felt like things might be okay, but that feeling didn't last. After the ceremony, we went home for the dinner I had planned. I had gone all out. Tessa's favorite foods, a gorgeous cake, and decorations that made the house feel festive without being over the top. Tessa's friends came over, and for a little while, everything felt normal again. She was laughing, smiling, and even thanked me for the cake. Then her phone rang. She stepped outside to take the call, and when she came back in, her entire mood had shifted. She walked straight up to me, her expression calm but cold. "My mom's on her way," she said like it was no big deal. I froze. "What? She wants to celebrate my graduation too," Tessa said. I tried to stay composed. "Tessa, I don't think that's a good idea. After what happened at your birthday? None of that would have happened if you hadn't tried to control everything," she snapped, cutting me off. Control? Now I understood why she was upset all that time. "Tessa, I've done everything I can to support you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But your mom caused a scene at your party. I'm just trying to avoid another situation like that." She rolled her eyes. "Maybe you're just jealous because she's my real mom." That one stung. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, she turned to her friends and said, "Let's go. I don't want to be here anymore." They all followed her out, leaving me standing in the living room, stunned. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had spent weeks planning that dinner, making sure everything was perfect, and she walked out without a second thought. I turned to Brett, expecting him to say something, anything, to back me up. Instead, he just sighed and shook his head. "You didn't need to make a big deal out of it," he said, his tone dripping with disappointment. "A big deal?" I said. "She invited her mom without telling us, and I'm the one to be blamed for trying to keep things from blowing up again?" He shrugged. "You could have handled it better." His passive words and reactions got on my nerves. That was the moment I realized how little support I actually had in this so-called partnership. Brett wasn't going to back me up, no matter how wrong Tessa's behavior was. In his eyes, I was always the one at fault. The next few days were a blur. Tessa stayed out late, barely coming home except to grab a change of clothes or eat something. When she did show up, she'd ignore me completely, acting like I didn't exist. Brett wasn't much better. He avoided me, retreating to his office whenever I tried to bring up what had happened. Then, a week later, Tessa walked into the house waving an envelope in the air. "I got into State University," she announced, her voice filled with excitement. Brett jumped up from the couch to hug her. "That's amazing, Tess. I'm so proud of you." I stood there, smiling politely, trying to be happy for her despite everything. But then she focused her gaze on Brett deliberately, and her tone shifted. "Tell your wife she needs to pay for my tuition," she said with a smirk, like it was a foregone conclusion. I blinked, caught completely off guard. "Excuse me? You've been saving for this, right?" she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "You're the one with the money. Girl, what?" After everything she'd said and done, she just expected me to open my wallet like nothing had happened? That was the funniest thing I've heard. "Tessa," I said as calmly as I could, "I'm not paying for your college. You've made it clear that I'm not your mom, so maybe you should ask your real mom to help you out." Her face turned red, and she immediately started yelling. "You're doing this to hurt me. You're punishing me because you're jealous of her." I shook my head. "This isn't about punishment. It's about respect, and you've shown me none." She stormed off, slamming her bedroom door. Brett stood there, staring at me like I'd just committed some unthinkable crime. "How could you say that to her?" he demanded. "Are you serious right now?" I shot back. "After everything she's put me through, you expect me to just hand over thousands of dollars? She's a kid, Lauren. She doesn't know any better." "That's not an excuse, Brett. She's old enough to know how to treat people with basic decency, and she's made it clear she doesn't respect me. The argument went nowhere. Brett stormed off, and I was left standing alone in the kitchen, wondering how things had gotten so bad. At that moment, I realized I was done trying to make this work. No matter how much I give, they will always see me as the evil stepmom. So yeah, that's where I am right now. I don't know where all this is heading to, but I know that I can't stay silent and let them humiliate me. Do you guys think I ruined her moment? Update 2. Hey again, everyone. As I expected, the tension didn't just linger. It grew worse. The days that followed were painfully quiet, almost suffocating. Tessa made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me, going out of her way to avoid me like I wasn't even there. Brett wasn't much better, but it wasn't just about the argument anymore. It was about how Brett and Tessa had slowly eroded any sense of partnership or family we'd had. I wasn't just the outsider, I was the enemy. A week after the college acceptance blow, Brett finally decided to have a talk with me. I use the term loosely because it wasn't a conversation so much as him trying to guilt me into changing my mind. Don't judge her, Lauren, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter. She's stressed, and she lashed out. You can't take it personally, I said calmly. Brett, she's been treating me like garbage for months. She doesn't see me as part of her life unless she wants something. And you expect me to just write her a blank check for college? She's your stepdaughter, he said. Like that alone should be reason enough. No, Brett, I said firmly. She's your daughter, and I've done everything I can to support her. But respect goes both ways. She's made it very clear that she doesn't want me in her life. Why should I be the one paying for her future when she's shown me nothing but disdain? He sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the unreasonable one. You're punishing her for being a teenager. She doesn't mean half the things she says. Even if that's true, I said, she needs to learn that actions have consequences. You can't just treat people like they're disposable and expect them to give you everything you want. Brett didn't have a response to that. Instead, he changed tactics. Fine. If you won't pay for it, what do you suggest we do? She needs this opportunity, Lauren. We can't just let her future fall apart because of a few arguments. Then maybe her mom should step up, I said simply. He froze for a moment. You know her mom can't afford that. And why is that my problem? I shot back. You and Tessa have made it very clear that I'm not her parent, so why am I the one being held responsible for her education? The conversation ended there, with Brett storming off and muttering something about me being selfish. But I didn't feel selfish. I felt drained. A few days later, Tessa decided to confront me herself. She came into the living room where I was working on an event proposal, her face set in a look of determination. I want to apologize for the birthday party, she said abruptly. I put my laptop aside, surprised. Okay, I shouldn't have invited Mom without telling you. I get now that you were trying to make it special for me. I'm sorry. The apology caught me off guard. Tessa wasn't exactly known for owning up to her mistakes, so this was unexpected. But I nodded. Thank you. That means a lot. She looked almost relieved. I was embarrassed, and I didn't know how to handle it. I know you tried to make the party special for me, and I shouldn't have acted the way I did. I felt a flicker of hope that maybe this was the start of something better. I appreciate you saying that. It was never about controlling anything, Tessa. I just wanted to make sure you had a good day, and I didn't want things to go off the rails. For a moment, I let myself believe this was genuine. Maybe we were finally making progress. But then she said, yeah, you were right. She paused for a moment. Her tone shifted and continued. So, I was wondering if you'd reconsider paying for my college tuition since I just apologized. There it was again. I knew she wasn't the type to apologize unless she wants something. I sighed. Tessa, I appreciate the apology, but this isn't about one event. It's about years of disrespect. An apology doesn't fix everything. Her face turned red. So you're just going to ruin my future to prove a point. You're unbelievable. Her voice cracking and her tears streaming down her face. Before I could say anything, Brett walked in. What's going on? We stayed silent, staring at each other with anger. Brett eventually guessed what we were talking about since the same scenario has been going on for days. He looked at Tessa and saw her crying. Then he turned to me and didn't try to hide his anger. Do you even care about this family anymore? He asked. I care about this family more than you think, I said. But caring doesn't mean letting people walk all over me. This isn't about you, Lauren, he snapped. This is about Tessa's future. No, Brett. This is about the fact that you've let her treat me like I'm nothing. And now you expect me to reward her for it. That's not how this works. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw clenched. If you're not willing to support her, then maybe this isn't going to work. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his sudden ultimatum. Are you saying you want a divorce? If you're not going to be part of this family, then yeah, maybe I am, he said, his voice cold. I shrugged, trying to hide how much his words stung. Then go ahead, Brett. File the papers. But don't expect me to apologize for standing up for myself. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. Tessa, always ready to twist the knife, gave me a smug smirk as she sauntered out behind him. The silence that followed felt heavier than the argument. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, wondering when standing up for myself had become such a crime. Now I feel devastated, drained, and just want to disappear. This has taken too much from me, and I'm ready to get the hell out of it once and forever. I'll keep you guys updated. Final update. Hey everyone. I wanted to give an update since so much has happened. The morning after my last argument with Brett and Tessa, I walked into the dining room and found Brett sitting there with a stack of papers. Divorce papers. He didn't even bother looking up when I came in, which, honestly, just fueled the audacity of the whole thing. After everything I had done, everything I had tried to make work, this was how it ended? I stood there and asked, "So this is where we're at?" He finally looked up, face blank. "You made it clear last night, Lauren. You don't want to support this family." I laughed sharply. Support this family? Brett, I've been the only one holding it together for years. And now you're playing the victim because I won't fund Tessa's college after she's treated me like garbage? He sighed like I was exhausting him. I don't want to argue. It's obvious we're not on the same page anymore. It's better for everyone if we just move on. There was no emotion in his, just cold indifference. I stared at him for a moment, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement that he cared about what we were losing, but there was nothing. Fine, I said, quieter now. Let's get this over with. And that was it. No fight, no attempt to salvage anything. Just the quiet realization that this was how it was going to end. The days after that were a blur. Brett moved into the guest room while we sorted out the logistics. I told him up front that the house and my event planning business were non-negotiable. He didn't fight me on it. I think he knew he had no leverage, but that didn't stop him from throwing little digs my way. Must be nice to have everything handed to you, he muttered one day while we were dividing assets. I lost it. Handed to me? Brett, I built this business from the ground up. You have no idea how much work I've put into this. Don't you dare try to downplay it. He didn't respond, just shrugged like he couldn't be bothered. Tessa was another story entirely. She barely spoke to me, which wasn't surprising, but it still hurt. When she did talk, it was loud enough for me to overhear. Always to Brett. Always painting me as the villain. She doesn't care about us, I heard her say one night. She's just thinking about herself, Brett replied. I didn't even bother defending myself anymore. What was the point? They had decided who I was, and nothing I said or did was going to change their minds. When they finally moved out, I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I just felt hollow. The house was so quiet again, like it was before they moved in. It was unsettling at first, like I was living in an echo of everything that went wrong. But slowly, I started to take back control of my space and my life. I painted the walls brighter colors, replaced the furniture Brett loved, but I always hated, and added little touches that felt more like me. It wasn't just redecorating, it was reclaiming something I had lost along the way. My only escape was my business. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger clients and challenging projects. The first major event I did post-divorce was a corporate gala, and it was a massive success. The glowing feedback reminded me I was more than just a wife or stepmom. I was capable, thriving, and good at what I did. Eventually, though, I started hearing bits and pieces about Brett and Tessa. They were living in a small apartment across town, and things weren't great. Brett's contracting business was struggling, and Tessa had dropped out of college after just one semester. She was working retail at the mall, which wasn't the future anyone had imagined for her. I won't lie, part of me felt vindicated. They had painted me as the villain, but now they were seeing what life was like without me. Still, I didn't feel any joy in their struggles. If anything, I felt sad for the family we could have been if things had gone differently. After weeks of working, I decided I needed a break, something just for me. So, I booked a vacation. No overthinking, no endless planning. I just picked a place, packed my bags, and went. The trip was life-changing. For the first time in years, I felt free. I explored, indulged, and soaked in moments that were mine alone. There were no expectations, no one demanding my attention. I wasn't anyone's wife, stepmom, or caretaker. I was just me. While I was away, I shared a photo on Instagram, a picture of me by the water, smiling with the caption, "A little escape does wonders." It was simple, lighthearted, and exactly how I felt in the moment. Not long after, I noticed a reply to the story from a new account. No profile picture, no posts, and a generic username. The message read, "You really think you're better off without us?" It hit like a slap, not because I cared what it said, but because I instantly knew who it was. Brett. The tone, the passive aggressiveness, it was so him. He'd actually taken the time to create a fake account just to send me that petty jab. For a moment, I felt the old frustration bubbling up. I wanted to respond, to tell him to grow up, to remind him of everything I'd endured. But then I realized something. This was proof that I'd moved on, and he hadn't. So I deleted the message, blocked the account, and carried on with my day. That single moment solidified something for me. Brett and Tessa were my past. Their opinions and bitterness didn't have a place in my new life. I wasn't going to waste another second worrying about their approval or their resentment. The vacation had reminded me of what life could be: free, fulfilling, and mine. From then on, I stopped looking back and kept moving forward, knowing I was finally on the right path. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to let go of the pain and making room for something better. Now, my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I've built a business I'm proud of, found someone who truly values me, and created a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. And honestly, that's more than enough.